everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really excited. This is the first concert of, or excuse me, program series for 2022 for the Wayne Public Library. And we are going to be having a nice conversation with Amy London, vocalist and educator. And she currently sings solo and with the Royal Bobsters. I'm very excited that we're able to continue into this. And just a quick note is March is Women's History Month. So this is a perfect way, I think, to start the year, to start with strong women jazz performers. And so this couldn't have been more serendipitous. So thank you and welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Patty. So good to be here. Hi, everybody.
I'm really excited to start this. So you and I had the pleasure of talking on the phone previously, and you are originally from Ohio, but you have been living in New Jersey for quite some time, and our program is very New Jersey centric. So how old were you when you moved from Ohio?
I moved to New York when I was 22 years old. After college, a year after college, I moved to New York City, kind of like Mary Tyler Moore. I got to Times Square, threw my hat in the air, and went, "I'm here, everybody. Aren't you all thrilled?" You know, with that kind of Pollyanna from Ohio kind of attitude, which I think you need to move from another city to New York City. You just need to be a Pollyanna and be super optimistic and a little naive.
Now, when you were growing up, you obviously have to have an extensive background. I believe you learned piano, and you also learned how to read music, correct?
Yes, I grew up in the public school system in Cincinnati, Ohio. We have really excellent public schools there. And as it was the habit in those days, and I don't think it is so much anymore, sadly, we started sight reading and reading music in the second grade at the age of 8. We all started playing recorder, and we all joined the choir. And for those of us that loved it, we hung in there with it. I mean, I loved recorder. I graduated from plastic to wooden, and then I got an alto recorder and several soprano recorders, and ended up playing early music in high school with a recorder ensemble just for fun. But I became a kind of a choral geek in third grade. I fell in love with singing in the choir, and I also enjoyed sight reading, learning how to read music. I took a lot of pride in that, and I also started piano lessons at the same age. But I grew up, the piano was in the house before I was born. And there is actually a photograph of me in diapers at the age of 1, like reaching up to the piano from like, you know, sitting up. I know my dad probably propped me on the bench and took a picture. So I've always been drawn to the piano from a very early age. I've always played the piano, and I've read since an early age, which is a really important skill for singers, to be able to play the piano and to be able to read music. And actually, that is why I became a jazz educator. I always played and I always read. And when I moved to New York, I found that there were a lot of jazz singers that didn't know how to read music or play the piano or write charts for the band. And I was like, oh my goodness, I got to start teaching. These folks need to learn these skills to be professionals. So yeah, and I grew up, I mean, we're talking about the days of like Peter, Paul, and Mary and girl groups. So I was singing harmony from the age of, I think, 4 or 5, because I'm the youngest of 3 girls, and my eldest sister, Linda, played guitar and sang, and we would just harmonize on stuff. I mean, she would pull out her guitar, she would play folk songs or whatever, and we would harmonize together. It was kind of automatic. It was easy. It was like in the family, it was natural.
I mentioned to you earlier, I'm a very frustrated wannabe singer. I can't sing. I want to sing harmony in another life. If I could come back, this is my dream. I'm jealous that you were able to harmonize with your sisters, because they can do it, but I can't.
I don't know. It was just something that I naturally went to. We listened to the radio constantly. I mean, when we were in the car with Mom, we had the radio on, and we were always singing along. And I think as a child, I found it more interesting to sing the harmony than the melody. The melody was too obvious, so I would go to the harmony because it was more harmonically challenging, and I was just drawn to harmony from a very early age. It's just kind of where I went. And also, I was an alto as a kid, and I think it was easier to sing alto harmony than the high part, which is the soprano.
I'm very jealous of your talent and talent you have in spades here. Now, I'm curious, have you ever wanted, or have you performed where you accompanied yourself and sang solo?
Well, that's what my big Achilles heel is, and the thorn in my side is that I wasn't more serious about self-accompaniment and working as a solo at the piano and singing. I have done a little bit. When I was about 11 years old or 12 years old, I think I was in 7th grade, my middle sister, Patty, brought home Laura Nero's Eli and the 13th Confession, which is like my #1 desert island record. I know every note on that record. I sang along with that record 5 million times. I still use it as a warm-up. And I flipped out when I heard Laura Nero. I just flipped out. And my mom went to the music store and she found a Laura Nero songbook with 4 of the albums in it, her first 4 albums, and the piano arrangements in the book were pretty much what she was playing on the records. And because I could read, I would sit at the piano for hours after school and play and sing her stuff. So I can play and sing Laura Nero. And I can play and sing jazz tunes, many of them. You know, the thing is that I've worked with such great piano players, like really top shelf piano players. It's like, who wants to hear me when I could sing with somebody like Bill Charlap, or, you know, any of a number of great piano players. Who wants to listen to me play piano? So as my singing kind of got more and more sophisticated, my piano playing kind of stayed at I can play for my students level and I can play for my own practicing level. But maybe sometime in my lifetime, I can get a little more serious about it and come out of the closet with it. But yeah, I do play the piano and I can accompany. So yeah.
Were there any other instruments that you had wanted to learn, perhaps like guitar, like your sister, or any other, besides recorder, of course?
I could not do guitar. I'm very OCD. Everything has to be in order, and the piano is perfect because every note is in order. I found the guitar daunting because there was this string and that string, and they weren't in order. I tried guitar for like a minute, and I was like, I'm sticking with the piano. I did love playing recorder as a kid, and I got into kind of early music recorder quartet things. And I do play percussion, actually, not heavily, but I got to sing with a Latin band for 3 years in the early 80s. I got a job with doing Latin weddings in Queens at the Astorian Manor, a catering hall. And I mean, I was so young. I had just gotten out of college. I was like nice girl from the Midwest. I had never heard salsa. I had never heard Cuban music. I didn't know who Celia Cruz was. I didn't know anything about this music. And I went to the first gig. They just wanted like a chick singer to, like, you know, dance around on the stage and sing She Works Hard for the Money and then go sit in the corner for 3 hours. And so the first gig, that's what I did. I sang 1 or 2 songs and the band leader said, okay, good, you're done, go sit down. And I watched this band, I was like, oh my God, this music is amazing. So I realized that if I could pick up some percussion toys, I could be on the band with the band and just like play shakers or play claves or a guiro or maracas, whatever I could do. So I went to percussion school. I went to a school called Boys Harbor on 5th Avenue, wonderful school for Latino music, not Brazilian, for Cuban music. And I took a percussion class from the drummer who was in the band. He told me about the class. His name is Johnny Almendra. He was the teacher and he taught me how to play all these different toys. And so I have my bag of toys. I take it on gigs, but I played the toys for 3 years. Every weekend, I would be on the stage with the band. I wasn't singing that much. I was only singing 3 songs in a 4-hour gig, but I was dancing and singing to this fabulous Cuban music. And, you know, the gig eventually ended. And then I was watching PBS one night and I realized much later on that the guys in the band were the Fania All-Stars, which were like, they were like at the heart of New York City Cuban music in the 60s to 70s, especially. They recorded with Johnny Pacheco and Celia Cruz. I mean, these were the top cats in that industry, and they had to make a living, so they would do weddings on the weekend. And they were in the band. I was in the band with them, and it you know, I like I said, I didn't know anything about that music when I started, but as the years went by, I went, wow, these cats are heavy. One of the guys in the band was the trombonist Barry Rogers, who he changed the whole texture of Latin music by putting in the trombone section, and he played with Eddie Palmieri, and he was really nice. He used to give me rides because he was my neighbor. And I mean, these cats were very heavy. There was the lead singer and the lead conga player was Jimmy Sabate, who had this hit song called To Be With You, this kind of rumba bolero ballad that was a huge hit. He would play it every weekend on the gig, And the minute he started singing, all the women would come running to the stage screaming and like going bananas over this tune. So I was really fortunate to get this wedding gig, and I learned so much about that music, and I still incorporate what I learned on that gig with my own choices, with my teaching. I bring my toys to class and I teach my students how to play the instruments for bossa nova and for Cuban music. And if you look at our first album, we recorded a song called Invitation to Jazz Standard. And Darman Meter, who was the tenor for the first album, I said, Darman, why don't you do Invitation as your feature? You can start it as a bolero rumba and then go into Afro-Cuban 6/8 and then come back to the bolero rumba at the end. And he did it, and it's magnificent. And he sounds amazing on it. He wrote a great chart. And we have the Latin percussionist Steve Kroon on both albums. And we really did like a Latin treatment of that tune. So I think my suggestion for that arrangement came from my experience in that band and my research into that music and listening to it. So I definitely incorporate that style. And that said, if you're a Cole Porter fan at all, you know, Cole Porter was such a genius. You can take almost any Cole Porter tune and you can do it Latin style. It works as a rumba, bolero, salsa, samba, bossa nova. It's amazing that you can do that with almost any Cole Porter tune. So that's kind of a fun fact to know and tell and use.
Right, you just gave me a homework assignment, so guess what I'm doing tonight when I get home is I'm going to explore all the Cole Porter into Latin, because I also love Latin music, and it's exciting to explore all those different rhythms and such. Though the band you're describing almost sounds like the wrecking crew of Latin music. If
you just go to YouTube and Google the Fania All Stars, you'll hear some of these guys. I mean, they were right in the thick of it, and I think the heyday for Fania All Stars, I think, was like early 70s, like during the 70s. And I met these guys in the early 80s. So I think they were still part of that scene. And, you know, there's a documentary about Fania All Stars. And also they are, some of them are portrayed by actors in the Celia Cruz movie on Netflix. It's like 70 episodes. I watched the entire thing. They did this kind of, what do you call those, docudrama, like about Celia Cruz, where they go over her whole life, and they're in there. Those guys are in there. The actors portray them. So yeah, it's a very deep, rich, and beautiful music, and I feel so grateful that I got to experience it.
So your training is classical and operatic, correct? And then you were exposed into jazz.
Well, my training really is choral, because I stayed in choir through 12th grade. I started taking jazz singing lessons as a senior in high school. I started taking jazz piano when I was, I think, in 10th or 11th grade. And there was a great big band at my high school, led by somebody named Gary Johnston, who I've reunited with, and he's bringing me to Cincinnati for a concert in late July. I performed in Cincinnati in December, and he came to my concert, and we've kind of reconnected. He was a great big band director. So in the 7th grade, for the first time in my life, I heard live jazz. I was 12 years old. I sat down in the big auditorium, and there was our big band playing jazz. And I was like, it struck me. I thought, this is amazing. So that was my first exposure to jazz. And Fred Hirsch, the very famous pianist, actually was the pianist in that band, because we went to high school together. So, and Mark Wolfley, a friend of mine in Cincinnati, who has stayed in Cincinnati, has been the drummer. He was the drummer in the big band, and he's been the percussionist and the drummer with the Cincinnati Pops Orchestra for like 40 years. So a lot of great people came out of that big band. So I heard jazz for the first time in high school, but I was really into Laura Nyro and Joni Mitchell and Carole King. That's what I was into, James Taylor, and I was into musicals. But then about 10th, 11th grade, I decided to study jazz piano, and I studied with a wonderful pianist, Frank Wolf. And one day I said, Frank, I want to study jazz singing. So I had 3 lessons as a high school senior with this guy named Milt Weiner. And he was really old. He used an ear trumpet and a reel-to-reel tape machine. And I had 3 lessons with him. Milt Weiner had been the musical director at WLW Radio. This is back in the days before television. And he had coached Doris Day and Rosemary Clooney. And that's when WLW was a nationally syndicated radio station. So they got their starts in Cincinnati. They both were from Cincinnati. So I actually started singing jazz a little tiny bit as a high school senior, I loved musical theater. I went to Syracuse University to pursue musical theater. So they put me with an operatic voice teacher who taught me opera technique, which you need that technique to sing musical theater. So it's not that I've studied opera. I was kind of involuntarily studied opera because that's what he taught. So I dipped my toe in opera and in the classical singing technique. It's called bel canto, which means beautiful singing in Italian. The Italians kind of put their stamp on musical pedagogy. Like all the expressions that we use in music come from Italian. Piano is an Italian word, piano. Alto, soprano, tenore, basso, these are all Italian words. Rubato means when you go out of tempo, and adagio, all these words that you use in music come from the Italians. So there's this whole school of a style of singing called bel canto, where you learned how to use your upper register and really develop it. So it was really great to learn that. I loved dipping my toe in opera. I would sing along with records and imitate like Risa Stevens and people like that. Did a couple of arias from Carmen, and I tried it. I realized I did not want to do that as a living, but I did study it. And as a voice teacher, it's helped me tremendously, because I have all of my students have at least a 3-octave range because I teach them the bel canto method. In my sophomore year in college, I auditioned for and got the part as the singer with the big band. So that's really when my jazz thing kind of started. And I kept that gig for sophomore, junior, and senior in college. And I was kind of moving away from musical theater and getting more into jazz. So it's not that I had any big opera career. I just was taught the technique, which was very helpful. But I always loved, I kind of transitioned from Laura Nyro to Billie Holiday to Ella Fitzgerald to singing with the big band and then moving to New York. So that was kind of my path in college.
Does the vocal training that you received when you were at Syracuse and prior to that, is that where you learned more of the breathing methods to sustain?
Wow, gosh, Patty, that is an excellent question. That is a really very intelligent question. Okay, so yes, breathing is very, very important for singing, and I teach breathing constantly. My high school choral teacher, Bij Hammonds, was a wonderful teacher. I had him from 7th to 12th grades. He did some breathing work with us, but I started taking yoga in junior year of high school. So I took yoga every week. I went to yoga class every week in junior and senior year for 2 years. And the breathing that you learn for yoga, like the first thing you do is you lie on the floor and you do 8-count breathing. That is what my breathing is based on, because I realized that the breathing for yoga is the same breathing for singing. So I put it all together for myself, a combination of Bij Hammonds' really excellent warm-ups and the yoga that I studied in high school, and then my bel canto training. I put it all together because my goal was to be able to sing to the best of my ability and to use my voice to its outer limits, to be able to have as much power and ability as I could possibly muster up. And having good breath support is a really important part of that. It's important. It doesn't matter what style you sing, opera, jazz, musical theater, country, pop, punk, rock and roll, blues, gospel, whatever you're doing, you got to be able to breathe properly. It's a really important part of singing.
It's interesting that I saw interviews with various women, female singers who had performed in Sweeney Todd, and every single one of them said that Stephen Sondheim was not a fan for helping the women get through that song By the Sea, and that there is absolutely no place to breathe in By the Sea, and that you have to basically employ the technique where you're inhaling and exhaling and singing all at the same time. Am I correct about this?
I don't think it's possible to inhale and sing at the same time. There's something that you learn a lot of terms when you're in choir, and there's something that we call staggered breathing, which means you sneak a breath when somebody else doesn't. When you're in choir, sometimes, many times, you take a breath together. We do this in the Bobsters and our rehearsals. We will sit and pour over the music and go, okay, we're breathing on 4. We're breathing on the 4th beat, we're breathing on the downbeat, and we'll put a little check and pencil and we breathe together. But there's other times when you do staggered breathing where you sneak a breath in when somebody else isn't breathing. And I promise you that's what they were doing. I promise. it's singing. You have to exhale to sing. You can't, that's inhaling and making a sound. It's not too pretty. So I don't think it's possible to inhale and sing at the same time.
Now, you had mentioned Fred Hirsch, and I believe he is a pianist on one of your early solo albums. Am I right?
Yes. So Fred, in the 1980s, Fred started a production company called Classic Sound in his loft in Soho. And all of us singers went to him and did projects, and I was one of them. So I went to Fred in 1987, and we did a whole project of, I think, 8 or 10 tunes. I edited it down to 8, and I called the record Bridges. I recorded it in 87. I almost got a record deal. I didn't get a record deal, and I got depressed about it. So I literally took the 2-inch master and put it on the closet shelf, like literally. And then I got married, had kids. And so 20 something years later, I went, okay, 20 years later, I went, you know what? This is a really good record. I combined it with some other recordings I did around 1990. And so there are 15 songs on the record. It's kind of a compilation of my early recordings. And I released it in 2017. I call it my new old record because it started in 87. Actually, there's a couple of songs on it from 1984, I think. 84, 87, and 1990. But I released it in 2017. I guess that's not 20 years, but anyway. It took a while for that to come out, but it is me singing at that age. So
You have a wonderful version of Love for Sale on that album, and it's one of my favorite songs, and especially I'm very familiar with Ella Fitzgerald's version of it in a ballad, and I love the fact that you start off as a ballad and then you suddenly change it to a samba, and I was like,
wow, that's another great observation. I wrote that arrangement. First of all, I learned, a lot of jazz songs have verses, and that, when the only sound in the empty street is the heavy tread of those heavy feet, that's the verse to Love for Sale. And a lot of people don't know the verses because the hit song might be just the chorus without the verse. But Ella recorded that verse, so I learned it from Ella. Mark Murphy was the king of the verse. He always was digging up the verses. And it's funny that you brought up that tune, because I was literally on the R train coming back from one of my Latin Latin weddings with the salsa, the Fania All-Stars, one of those wedding gigs, when I heard that lick in my head, ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da, ba-doo-doo, ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da, ba-doo-doo, ba-ba-da, da-da-da, 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 ba-ba-da, Love for Sale. So I ran to the piano. When I got home from the gig, it was probably 2 a.m, and I wrote down the little lick that I heard in my head. So I was very influenced by the gig that night, and I went home and wrote that arrangement. And then so all the arrangements on that recording, they were my ideas, and then I brought them to Fred or whoever else I collaborated with, and they expanded upon my ideas, which is something that I teach my students to do. I'm like, if I ever write my autobiography, it'll be called Dispelling the Myth of the Chick Singer. We are brought up, or there's this vibe in the jazz world that vocalists don't know what they're doing, and they have to go to somebody, a musician, not that singers aren't musicians. You have to go to a musician for your arrangements. And I realized pretty early on that I could write my own arrangements. I had my own ideas, and I had enough skills writing music and playing the piano that I could write my ideas down. That doesn't mean that I would have a completely finished arrangement, but I could collaborate with another musician, and singers are musicians. We are all musicians. So I teach all my students to be arrangers. Like, you are an arranger. You hear these things, you hear the arrangements in your head. This is how you write this down. This is how you write that down. So I help them learn how to write their ideas down. But that particular arrangement, I was on the R train and I heard it in my head, and I ran to the piano when I got home and wrote it down.
I'm so glad that you pointed that out, and I think this is one of the titles I should have included, is that you are an arranger, and that's such a huge thing. And when I had the fortune to talk to Bill Charlap, and he was talking about Tony Bennett, and that he really made a point to say Tony Bennett is a musician. Some call him a singer, but he's a musician, and he gave an example of how his choices of how he's going to sing a phrase or execute really makes a huge impact on the entire song. And so, I find it unfortunate that when you say not just that you're as women vocalists that you're not getting the respect that you need, but also I guess vocalists as well. But yeah, it's an incredible talent that you have to be able to write those and have that conversation and be able to collaborate. So I'm hoping that that changes as you teach all this younger generation in the
Well,
various
it's
schools.
something that I witnessed very early on in my life in New York. I had the skills from childhood. And when I moved to New York and I started getting gigs in jazz clubs, I saw tools I needed to be a successful jazz singer. I needed to write my own charts, which were all, by the way, the Great American Songbook is all a fourth too high for women. And because I could read and write, I was able to transpose. And I thought that like everybody could do this. And then I realized that I needed to be able to count tunes in and know my keys. So right away, I actually have always gotten respect. I've never been disrespected in the jazz world because I've always kind of had my, you know what, together. I've had my charts. I can count off tunes. I know my keys. I've got good musicianship skills. But I saw other women being disrespected by men. It's just what it happened to be in those days. And that's, you know, like I said, that's when I started teaching. I'm like, this is not okay. And I talk to my students about this all the time. You know, singers, we're lucky in a way that you don't have to have musicianship skills to be a good singer. You could just get up and open your mouth and have a beautiful voice. You know, I don't know if Billie Holiday read music. I don't know if John Hendricks claimed he didn't read music. I don't know if Annie Ross read music, but they were so skilled and so talented. They could just get up and do it. You know, I think a lot of I think the chick singer mentality goes back, it harkens back to the big band era, where there would be these big band singers and they'd put them in these big gowns, these big pink gowns with the hairdos and the makeups, and they would prop them up they'd put them on this pedestal in front of the band and they'd say, okay, go, and they would sing, you know. And I don't think that writing and reading charts maybe in some cases was not a job requirement. They had to have good ears. They had to come into the right place, get out at the right place. I'm sure many of them could read, but there were probably some that couldn't. And, you know, if you look at the old big bands, typically it's all men, the instrumentalists, and it was a girl singer, sometimes a boy singer. Johnny Mercer started out as a boy singer before he became the famous lyricist. But generally it was a girl singer, and she, you know, have like young and pretty and the whole thing. And they, you know, put them out there. And there might be actually a little hint of jealousy involved, because here's the guys, they're on the bandstand, they're working hard all night, they're reading page after page, they're playing their heads off, and the girl walks up and, you know, 32 bars gets all the attention, and, you know, the singer, you know. And so there may be actually some underlying jealousy there. And also singers use lyrics, so the audience responds to singers differently than they do to instrumentalists. A singer is telling you a story with words, whereas an instrumentalist is telling you a story with an instrument. It's different, and they get a different type of attention. So I think this chick singer mentality kind of harkens back to the big band days. And then as, you know, the big bands became a little bit out of fashion and things got smaller, and Ella Fitzgerald, for example, you know, morphed into being more of a small group singer with Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker and the whole bebop era, then these skills became a little bit more necessary if you wanted to lead your own band or be the leader, be the star, you know, or be the band leader, have your own group as the leader. You have to have these skills. And if you didn't, it was really a deficit. And when I saw that, I was like, this is not okay. This is not okay. So I have taught, by this point, thousands of students. I've been teaching, I started teaching at the New School, believe it or not, in 1984. It's been almost 40 years. And a lot of people have come through my classes. Jasmaya Horn came through all my classes, and she thanks me whenever she sees me, because she is writing some really amazing stuff now. And you know, when she was a freshman, I helped her learn how to write and how to arrange and get her charts together. All my students, they have to write charts. That's part of what I teach. That's how they get a grade. And that's how they perform in the concerts. They have to have their charts ready for the concert. So writing charts and, you know, getting your material together is a big part of what I teach.
And Jasmaya Horn, she recently performed on the 20th of February at the William Patterson current jazz series. And I had noted that she also performed with you in 2020, I believe, 2010, when you were forming together with the Royal Bobsters. Am I correct in that?
So yeah, so what happened was Holly Ross and I, my dear departed late friend Holly Ross, one of my best friends that we unfortunately lost to cancer in 2020, she and I went to visit Mark Murphy. He was moved to the Actors Fund home at the age of like 74, I think. 70, I can't remember how old he was, his early 70s. And it happened to be a 5-minute drive from my house in Teaneck. So Holly and I went to visit Mark in 2010. He was so depressed. He felt like he was in jail. I mean, here's this magnificent, one of the greatest jazz singers of all time with a 60-year career under his belt, 125 or 150 albums, revered around the world. And he's sitting in a nursing home being unappreciated and not singing. And he was so depressed. And I went, oh, come on, man, you're Mark Murphy. What do you mean nobody knows who you are here? So I started taking him out. Holly and I would, so I would I called him I would spring him from the joint, I had to get on a list of people that could release him from the nursing home. And I was constantly taking him to jazz clubs. If I was driving into the city, it was on my way. I'd call him and say, Mark, come on, get dressed. We're going to Kitano. We're going to the Vanguard. Come on, get dressed. We're going out. And we became really good friends. And he was one of my idols for decades. I never would have dreamed that I would become like his daughter. I mean, I became really like a family member for the last 6 years of his life. So I started bringing him to the new school because he had taught a lot and he was bored sitting in the nursing home. And I'm like, okay, come hang out with me. And I've led the choir at New School for many, many years, the vocal jazz ensemble. And I came up with this idea of, Dylan Pramick, the bass in the Royal Bobsters, who was a student at that time, brought in a great arrangement of Red Clay, which was a big hit for Mark. And he brought it into class and I went through it and I taught it to the class and I went, wait a minute, maybe we could do a concert with Mark. Wouldn't that be cool? So Mark said, yeah. So in December of 2011, we worked on the concert for a year on Saturdays. In December of 2011, we did a concert at the New School with Mark Murphy as our special guest soloist. It was standing room only, packed, sold out. And in the choir was Jasmaya. She was one of the sopranos in the group. I had about 10 students and I sang soprano, Dylan sang bass, and he had graduated by then, and Holly sang alto. So we were what you call ringers, when you have professionals come in. And the concert was a huge success. And after the concert was over, I said to Mark, you want to go in the studio and make a record? He's like, sure. So that's how the Bobsters actually started at the New School. But yes, Jasmaya was in that concert in 2011. And, she can probably still sing our Chasing the Bird, which is a Charlie Parker extravaganza that's on our first album that I wrote this crazy lyric to Charlie Parker's solo. And she can probably still sing it because she sang it in the concert with us. So yeah, I'm very proud of her. I mean, she was young. She was a freshman when she came into the New School. All of us teachers worked with her, and it's been wonderful to watch her development over the years. She's a powerhouse and a huge talent. And she's one of many, many students that I'm very proud of.
So I want to mention that I think another title we need to add to your growing list here is Innovator, because you were one of the principal architects of the very successful vocal department at New School's University's Jazz BFA program since 1992. And you also, in early 2014, you launched the Vocal Jazz Academy at the invitation of Christian McBride and Melissa Walker of the Jazz House Kids. That's remarkable. It's you didn't create just one. You created and developed and grew and nurtured two huge programs that are so very successful. So kudos to you.
Thanks. I mean, like I said, when I first moved to New York in the early 80s, I was like a restaurant worker for a few years. I was horrible at waitressing, so I became a prep chef. I'd be like in the back cutting vegetables and stuff like that. I worked for Sarah Beth in Sarah Beth's kitchen. I called myself a migrant jam worker because I would cut the fruit that went into those wonderful bottles of Sarah Beth's jam that are so successful. And I was doing gigs, but I couldn't make a living from gigs. And I was doing a fair amount of gigs, but it just wasn't enough money. So I did restaurant work. And one day a friend of mine said to me, Amy, why don't you teach? And I thought, well, okay, I could do that, So I went to the New School in 1984 and I got a job teaching there. And around the same time is when I really witnessed in some jazz clubs, like a lot of singers, like not having their stuff together and not knowing their stuff. So, I started teaching, and I realized when I got to the new school jazz department in 92 that the program was very new. It was very, very new. The jazz BFA program actually started in 96. I started at Manus and then moved up to the new school. Oh, no, it started in 86. Sorry. In the beginning, they really didn't have any dedicated classes for singers. It was a very small program, and the singers were just kind of thrown in with the instrumentalists. And I know how that works. The singers are shy. They're sitting on the sidelines while the instrumentalists are going, blah, 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 they're playing their heads off, and the singers are going, when do I get my turn? And they get, 5 minutes on the bandstand. I saw this. So when I got to the new school, when I got to Manus in 92, I started the jazz choir. I started a class where you learn how to sing with piano, bass, and drums, how to write charts. I started how to, teaching arrangements. I started private voice lessons, and I started producing concerts that were dedicated to the singers' classes. None of that was there yet. And I brought that into the new school when we were brought down from Manus to the new school in the village in 95, 96. I initiated a bunch of these classes that didn't exist. Sight reading was another class I initiated. And there was a wonderful teacher that was already there, Dr. Richard Harper, and he created a system of music theory, that he created this whole system that he was teaching that. So between the two of us, we really created like an entire program that was dedicated to singers and gave them the tools that they needed to be professionals. And that includes, as many students have come out of the new school that they want to sing pop, or they want to sing avant-garde jazz, or write their own music. It included composition and everything like that. It wasn't just the Great American Songbook. We wanted to give them the freedom to express themselves however they needed to, but we did create a whole program. And I was been there since the beginning. And the program has really, really grown. We have now, I think, 60 to 80 vocalists altogether between the freshman and senior classes. There's 60 to 80 vocalists now. There were 5 when I started. So it really has grown. And then Melissa Walker saw me at a workshop in New Jersey. It was an NJ Pack workshop that I did on a Saturday, and she approached me and asked me to start a program. And at that time, I was already working with Dylan Pramick, the bass in the Royal Bobsters, who's a marvelous teacher. So I said, Dylan, come on, let's do this together. And we started a program that was like a miniature, what do we call it? A college preparatory vocal department. We took all these things that I taught at the new school, and Dylan went through the new school program. That's where I met him. And we did like a mini version of that. And it's a really terrific program. And Dylan is now writing arrangements specifically for the Jazz House kids. He's written a lot of choral arrangements that are geared towards soprano, alto, bass, we call it, because boys' voices change at 13, 14, 15. It depends on the kid. And you have to be able to write for that range. It's not like writing for adults, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. It's a little bit different. So he's written a lot of 3-part harmony charts for them. But so I've been instrumental in starting these programs. And at a certain point, I just went, I'm a producer. I can produce a concert. The more I taught, the more I was producing concerts for my students. I went, okay, my dad told me one time when I was a kid, if you want something done right, do it yourself. So I went, okay, I can produce a concert, no problem. Yeah, I can put the students together, put their list of tunes together, hire the band, type up the program. I got that, so I've been doing that for decades. And I realized that I can kind of produce lots of things. So I produced our albums. I produce, we co-produce now, the Bobsters. But I kind of am a producer, it's like, it's kind of what you need to do in the music business. You have to put on your producer hat sometimes to produce the kind of show or the kind of recording that you want. And it's not that hard. You just kind of, have your goal in mind, and then just go step A, step B, step D, and build your way towards your goal. So yeah, it's fun. I like it. I'm thrilled that I've been able to do this with my life.
I think the pandemic also created that opportunity for many musicians of all types of music that they were unable to record or get in the studio. So they started making their own, and with the technology, they were able to kind of just learn these very integral skills. So it's fascinating. So let's see, we have you as vocalist, educator, innovator, arranger, producer and really good recorder player.
Fair. Quarter player. Yeah, I mean, we did, the Bobsters did 3 videos during the pandemic that are available on YouTube. We did On a Misty Night, which was a bit of a hit from our second album, Party of Four, our most recent album. We did Jazz Jump, which is a Lester Young solo with King Pleasure lyrics. It's an arrangement that Dylan wrote. It would have been the 13th song on our album, but we decided to save it for an individual single release. So we did a video of it. So it's not available on it's not part of the Party of Four, but it's available on YouTube and for download. And then Pete had written a really pretty a cappella arrangement of Christmas Time Is Here, which we also recorded a cappella. So we did those 3 videos during the pandemic, and, you know, they're available. You can watch them. And it's, you know, these days you kind of have to do that. It's kind of a bit of a calling card. This is the modern day, you know, you don't nobody hands out cards anymore. It's like, what's your website? Are you on Facebook? Where are your recordings? Or where's your YouTube presence? So this is our YouTube presence, is these 3 videos. So yeah, it was fun to do that. It was a little crazy with the technology and everything. I'm not that good at technology, so it was a bit of a challenge for me, but they did get done, and they're cute. They're available, and you can watch them on YouTube and on our websites also.
2 things I want to touch on here. One is with the Jazz House Kids. I believe it's a 2018 performance of you that Dylan had with 4 of your students, and singing Caravan as a first piece there. And these kids are unbelievable. And I'm amazed that I always had public speaking issues and fears, and which I've conquered, thankfully, in these last few years. But, you know, to see these kids get up there and sing in harmonies, and you guys do a fantastic job. So that's available on YouTube. The other thing is just to give a little bit background, the Royal Bobsters, which is one of the avenues that you showcase your extreme talent. It's had some different iterations. So the original was you with Holly Ross. Help me out here.
Okay, so yeah, the original iteration of the Royal Bobsters, Dylan Pramick and I have been in it from the beginning. We created it together with Holly. So when we did that concert with Mark, we didn't have a tenor ringer, but Darman Meter, who's been a good friend of ours for many years, knew about the concert, and he kept emailing me, Amy, what's up with that project? What's up with that project? What's up with that project? And when we decided to go in the studio, we invited him to be the tenor. Darman is the head of the very successful and wonderful group called New York Voices, who just celebrated their 40th anniversary, I think. He's probably the #1 choral jazz arranger in the world. He is highly respected in the business. And it was really a great honor to have him join us for the first album. But of course, you know, he's the New York Voices is his main gig, and he had to get back to that. So there was only one person in the entire world that I thought could be like an excellent tenor, and that's Pete McGinnis, who is an amazing tenor. And Darman and Pete, by the way, are true tenors. They're not bassists pretending to be tenors. They really are tenors, which is a little bit rare to find a jazz tenor. Pete has perfect pitch. He can sight read anything. He's been a trombonist his entire life. He's an amazing big band arranger. And he's 3-time Grammy nominated for his arrangements on his own recordings with his big band. He's just the highest level you can possibly get. And he happens to have a full-time music theory chair at William Patterson College. So he's a renowned jazz educator, and he's just absolutely marvelous to work with. And a lot of the arrangements that we sing have been written by him. He just wrote a new one. We're debuting a new piece currently, and we've got some more new pieces coming down the pike for our 3rd recording. We're not ready to record yet, but we're working on material for our 3rd recording. So that's how that happened. And I explained that, you know, Holly unfortunately passed away. She valiantly struggled with cancer for 3 years, and finally it got her. And then, so Gene is our new alto. So we do have a new iteration of the group. Dylan and I are still there, and Pete's our new tenor, and Gene is our new alto. And we are doing very well. We're going to be we're going to be at William Patterson at the Jazz Room Series on Sunday, March 25th at 2 p.m. We're going to be at Birdland in New York City, May 13th, 14th, and 15th with the bebop legend Sheila Jordan as our guest, who's 93 and kicking like nobody's business. She's jetting all over the world to gig. We're going to Austria this summer to have a tour in Austria. And I know there's more stuff. Oh, we're going to play the Deerhead, yeah, out in Pennsylvania, in Stroudsburg, which is a famous jazz club in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, not that far from the city, about an hour from the city. It's going to be on July 9th. I know we have more stuff coming down the pike. So our website is royalbobsters.com. I also have a lot of nice gigs coming up. I'll be in Ottawa, Canada on March 25th. I'll be in Cincinnati, Ohio, the last 3 nights in July. And I'll be going to Washington in October, and somewhere else. I just got invited. I can't remember, in October. Yeah, so very busy. And I've been playing at a really cute club in Midtown on Restaurant Row called Swing 46. I'll be there on Friday, March, what is that, 17th, I think. Yeah, Friday, March 17th. I'll be at with my own little group. It's just a quartet with guitar, trumpet, and bass on. And I've been playing there regularly since July. So I'm pretty busy. Got a lot going on. Thankfully, I'm very gratefully and thankfully, I have a lot going on.
So you just gave me 2 more nice segues to things that I wanted to ask you about. I was very fortunate last September to interview Pete McGuinness, and the next day I was able to interview Christian McBride, who was the bassist on your Party of Four album that you came out with in 2020, and that album, both the Royal Bobster Project and the Royal Bobsters Party of Four CDs will be available at the library in our collection for you to check
Great.
out. So one of the things I wanted to touch on, though, is online there is at the San Jose Summer Fest in 2016, there's a performance of But Not For Me, and it's one of my favorite jazz tunes, and of course the one that I hearken to is Judy Garland's, because it's from Girl Crazy, and it's very plaintive and it's very touching. And I was really curious to see where you guys were going to go with it. And I have to tell you, it's probably the most upbeat, devil may care version of But Not For Me that I've heard. And it's just interesting because when Judy sings it, it's very, you feel sorry for her. But when you guys sing it, it's kind of like, yeah, who cares? They're not writing songs for me. We're going to have fun anyway. And I love it. It's absolutely fantastic. And that's on YouTube.
Thank you. I mean, that's just interesting that you bring that up, because it's one of the first songs I teach every semester in one of my classes at the various colleges that I teach at. When I'm teaching a rubato plus a swing tune, a song that has a rubato verse and a swing tune. And the first thing I do is I go to YouTube and I show them all that footage of Judy singing it in Girl Crazy, in the movie, right? When she did those juvenile roles with Mickey Rooney, right? And she's a cowgirl and she's got a little cowgirl outfit, and it's very sad. It is a very sad lyric. But over the years, it kind of morphed into this upbeat song that instrumentalists play. And, and of course, Chet Baker loved it. And so what we did is we took one of the Chet Baker solos and Holly wrote a lyric to it. So yes, it's very up tempo, but it still has an element, I think, of maybe anger in it almost, that if you really listen to what we're saying, but it's a curious thing. It's like, how do you take a sad song and do it upbeat? The melody is very major. It's not a minor melody. It's in a major key. And if you didn't know the lyric, you'd hey, yeah, it's very jolly sounding, but the lyric is not jolly at all. And it did actually start out as a ballad. So it's like, how do you take, this is exactly a topic that I discuss with my students, because I believe for myself, and I tell them that the tempo that you choose for any song needs to emerge from the lyric. Like when I did that salsa version of Love for Sale on my Bridges album, which is, I did it very salsa, very up tempo. I tried to be a little angry about it. I'm like, this is a sad song. It was done originally as a sad song. It's from a Broadway musical called The New Yorkers, 1943, and it was sung very sadly. I want to do it with this like salsa, a samba. I'm not sure if we call it salsa or samba, it's somewhere in between beat. But how do you express the emotion in it that way? So I thought of a work situation that I was unhappy about. And I sang about that, love for sale. Here I am giving you all this work and you don't appreciate me because you have to come up with your own story. So, it's kind of it's a curious thing that the tempos that we choose and the stories that we're telling, and we really do need to match them.
I wanted to touch on the fact that you're teaching vocalese, which the terminology means is writing lyrics to instrumental tracks, if you will. So I saw an interview where you were speaking about Joni Mitchell, and you had mentioned in that, aside from her being an influence, and then her dedication that she had of focus, you mentioned that you had written lyrics to two songs by Elmo Hope. And are those on one of your albums?
Yes, I've actually written 3 Elmo Hope lyrics with permission from Bertha Hope, Elmo's widow. So I wrote, the first one I wrote was called, so when you write a vocalese, you have to change the title. It's a royalties thing. So you'll notice that every vocalese that we do has a slightly different title than the original instrumental version. The original instrumental title is called So Nice. And then with my lyric, it became It Could Be So Nice. And it's on my When I Look in Your Eyes album, which is on the Motema label. I've got 4 albums on the Motema label. And When I Look in Your Eyes came out in 2007, I think. So it's called It Could Be So Nice. And I not only wrote, I actually wrote my own melody. I didn't write to somebody's recorded horn solo. I wrote the melody and the lyrics. So I kind of wrote my own vocalese on both sides of it. I wrote a lyric to Eyes, Such Eyes, So Beautiful. It's not really a vocalese. I just wrote the lyric to the melody. Beautiful, haunting Elmo Hope ballad. And with my lyric, it's called Eyes So Beautiful As Yours. And then I wrote another lyric to a melody called Monique. And I called it My Darling Monique. So those 2 were actually just lyrics to the melodies. I wrote a vocalese on Bohemia After Dark, collaborated with Darman Meter on that in 1990, which is an Oscar Pettiford tune. I wrote my Let's Fly, which is my 2010 album, was a song given to me by Annie Ross that she wrote when she was a teenager. And I, again, wrote my own melody and then wrote lyrics to it, like as a vocalese section in the middle. I think that's everything, but there's more. I don't know. I can't remember. And then the stuff I've done with the Bobsters, we've done a lot of collaborations, and I'm writing some right now for our 3rd album. It's fun.
Well, on your album for When I Look in Your Eyes, you have a song Ohio, and which is a nod to your city of origin, correct, or state of origin, right?
That is correct. It's I did a medley of Ohio, and Any Place I Hang My Hat Is Home. Ohio is from Wonderful Town. It's Leonard Bernstein, and Any Place I Hang My Hat Is Home is a Harold Arlen tune. So I kind of like merged them together. Yeah. Why, oh, did I ever leave Ohio? That's like, you tell people you're from Ohio. So, the musical theater nerds will say that back to you.
There's so much I have to cover, and I'm trying to make sure we can squeeze it in. But right now, I want to talk about your influences. And one, of course, is Ella Fitzgerald, which you had mentioned earlier, Mark Murphy, Annie Ross. But one of the things that, as a librarian, I'm ecstatic about, well, first of all, I'm a huge Ella Fitzgerald fan. But you were able to sing with Ella on the DVD version of this book that came out that we have in the, I'm hoping you guys can see it here, but it's Ella Fitzgerald, a tale of a vocal virtuosa. And I'd love to hear more about that because I find that fascinating.
I can't tell you what year it was. It was probably 2003 or 4. Is there a date on the book?
I'll look that up.
Anyway, after that. So what Scholastic, the famous Scholastic Books, the children's book company, decided to take the images by the Pinckneys. It's Brian and Andrea Pinckney did that book, right? Isn't that correct? Brian and Andrea?
Correct, yes, yeah.
And they also did a beautiful book on Duke Ellington. So they took the 2 books and they used the images. They didn't really animate that. They animated them, but they made a little children's video out of it. I think it's 13 or 18 minutes long, the video. And I got a phone call to be the voice of Ella Fitzgerald. And, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the name of the composer. It was somebody Goodman. He composed pieces that sounded like something that Ella might have sung. So I was actually scatting and singing songs that might have been sung by Ella. I think it was like a royalties thing. They did use Ella's voice on a couple of songs, but I was like kind of the voice of Ella on this animated film. And it did very well. It won a bunch of awards, children's book awards, and it was really fun to do. I remember walking to the recording studio on the day that I was to record for this project, and I had Ella Fitzgerald's, my favorite record that she did, which is Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Duke Ellington Songbook. It's a 3 CD set where she recorded with the Duke Ellington Orchestra and with Billy Strayhorn. And I was listening, I was walking through Midtown listening to it on my headphones as I was going to the studio so I could be influenced. So it's a really fun project. I'm proud of it. It's a little hard to find now, but I have a copy if anybody wants to, I don't know. I don't know. I should maybe, I don't know, put it on my website or something like that. I do have a copy of the DVD. It came out as a video, VHS, before DVDs were invented, and then it became a DVD, and now I think it's out of print. But it was
I would
really
love to see it, and you're right. It was the book came out in 2002, so it was. I think you're saying shortly thereafter.
That they did the videos, and so that Billy D. Williams was the narrator, which is really cool. He narrated both books, I think, but he definitely narrated the Ella one. So it's cool. Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen the PBS special or biography of Ella Fitzgerald, and one of the things that I love about that, and I think I probably brought it up in the Pete McGinnis interview that I did, is the fact that they mentioned that Ella Fitzgerald in this one performance in Germany, her mind must be like a computer because she brought in so many. I guess you call them samples of about 60 different songs in this one song that she sang, and I'm assuming that you probably have the same kind of ability to draw on all these things as well.
I don't have that. I mean, every now and then they're called quotes. You're quoting another song. I mean, there's a very famous recording, Ella in Berlin, Ella live in Berlin from 1963, I believe, where she has that like 5,000 chorus version of How High the Moon, and she quotes "Smoke It's in Your Eyes," and she quotes other things. I think so. She did have, well, first of all, Ella Fitzgerald was a genius. She, hands down, a brilliant genius woman. There's no question about that. I think she did have, I would venture to say, although I have nothing to back this up, that she was probably great at math because she could scat sing the chord changes like nobody's business. And she did have a mind like a computer. All those lyrics and all those lines, and she was so brilliant. And she did do a lot of quotes. Some of them I think maybe were pre-planned a little bit, but who cares, because she did them and they were great. But I'm sure a lot of them were off the cuff, and there are a lot of musicians that can do that. I'm not that great at it, actually. But there are people that can really do a lot of quotes in their playing, yeah.
So I'm amazed to see how quickly the time is passing, and I'm hoping if I'd like to just ask 3 more things before we have to wrap this up. I'm enjoying it immensely, so I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Pat.
One of the things what I wanted to ask you is, and this may be a complete layman's question, but I'd like to know more about singing scat versus singing vocalese, and how would you describe it? How do you teach that?
Okay, so vocalese, the definition of vocalese is when you write lyrics to a pre-recorded horn solo, or it could be a piano solo, although it tends to be more like saxophone and trumpet solos. That's what vocalese is. And the people that pioneered that, well, Eddie Jefferson's like the father of vocalese, and he was brilliant at it. And he wrote the very famous Moody's Mood for Love, which is based on James Moody's solo on I'm in the Mood for Love. So of course they made a pun out of it, Moody's Mood for Love. And that was a very famous vocalese, one of the first ones. And King Pleasure, who was Eddie Jefferson's rival, had more of a hit with it than Eddie did. So people think that King Pleasure wrote it. He did not. King Pleasure wrote a great vocalese on Illinois Jughead's solo on All of Me. And that's really a great one. And then Lambert, Hendrickson, Ross picked up where Eddie Jefferson and King Pleasure left off. Okay, so they wrote tons of vocalese, and Lambert, Hendrickson, Ross' debut album is Sing a Song of Basie, where they took 10 count Basie recordings, songs that had been recorded, and they wrote lyrics to all of it, and then they overdubbed themselves in a kind of a rudimentary way, what was available in 57, and they did multiple harmonies with it. but they wrote lots of lyrics to these Count Basie recordings. And they went on from there to write many, many more vocalises. That was their thing. And the reason that Annie Ross was chosen to sing with Jon Hendricks and Dave Lambert is because she had previously written the lyrics to Twisted, which it was a Wardell Gray song and solo. It's brilliant. She wrote it like in one night. She talked about brilliant. I knew Annie very well. I'm very lucky. I got to know my heroes, some of them very well. I got to know Annie Ross very well. I got to know Jon Hendricks very well. I know Sheila is a very good friend of mine, Sheila Jordan and Bob Duro and Mark Murphy. I was like his daughter at the end of his life. I mean, we would just get in my car and drive all over the place. I brought him to my jazz camp in the Adirondacks and stayed there with me for a week. I mean, we really were very good friends. Annie was brilliant and I got to know her very well. So she wrote Twisted, Farmer's Market, and Jackie. 3 brilliant vocalises, all based on Wardell Gray solos, and that's how she got into Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. Before that, Jon and Dave had a choir. Once they heard Annie, they decided to cut it down to just the 3 of them. So the lineage is Eddie Jefferson, King Pleasure. I know I'm probably missing a few. Oh, there's a great video by the Delta Rhythm Boys where they do a vocalese on Take the A Train. It's an adorable video on YouTube, and I transcribed the arrangement, and Dylan and I taught it to the Jazz House kids a few years back. It's really a great video. It's on YouTube. I recommend it. The Delta Rhythm Boys, Take the A Train. It's one of those black and white films from the 40s. So they wrote one. So there's more people. And then the Manhattan Transfer did that album with Jon Hendricks called Vocalese. And then the New York Voices kind of took up from the Manhattan Transfer. And then we came along with our thing. So that's vocalese. Scat singing is when you improvise. You're making the notes up on the spot. And what you need to do in order to execute scat singing is you need to be able to sing through the chord tones. You need to play the piano, you need to study the chord changes and sing through them so that when you're on the bandstand, you can, like all of me, that's in G, right? So the first chord is the G. I'm just making this up now because I'm sitting at the piano, I'm playing the chords, and I'm singing through the chord tones in the song. And that's how you learn how to scat sing. You have to play the piano. Some people are really good at it without the piano. There was a great scat singer, Jackie Paris, not that well known, but in his day, he was quite famous, and he was hired by Charlie Parker to go on the road with him. No singers were ever invited to work with Charlie Parker, but Jackie Paris. He could really scat, and I'm not sure. No, I take it back. He played guitar. So he probably did practice on the guitar. Jon Hendricks claimed not to be able to play the piano or read music, but he could scat really well. I don't know if Ella played the piano. Perhaps she did. The thing that Ella did was she was on the bandstand starting at the age of 17 with the greatest soloists on the planet, 50 weeks a year, 6 nights a week. So she just absorbed, and then it came back out of her. So, I don't know if Betty Carter played an instrument, but she could scat. Sarah Vaughan was a great scat singer. She was a great piano player. Mark Murphy could scat great. He was a great scat singer. He was a piano player. He played the piano. He started out playing and singing. That's how his career started. So that's what scat singing is. It's improvising in the moment. You need to be able to sing through the chord changes. It's really important. So if you can play the piano and practice at the piano, that really helps a lot. But that's the difference. Vocalese is writing lyrics to a solo, and then you're going to sing the same exact notes when you perform it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm always expanding my knowledge when I have the great opportunity to talk to wonderful musicians such as you. So one of the things I do like to ask, and I find it a fascinating question, is what are the things that you have to bring to the table when you're performing, say, with your quartet, when you're at Swing 46, or when you're performing with Royal Bobsters, or when you're performing with a big band? What are the different, how is that different between each of those iterations?
Okay, that's a long answer. I'll try and make it short. My number one job, any vocalist of any genre, again, opera, country, pop, jazz, musical theater, our number one job is to tell a story, period. That is your number one job. So that has to be your focus all the time. What story am I telling? And, if you watch that Ella documentary, and by the way, there's another one called Something to Live For that was produced by Charlotte Zwerin in the 1990s. It's a wonderful video documentary about Ella. Somebody asked her a question, like, what inspires you? She said, well, I like a pretty story, was her answer. Telling a story is your number one job. And if you don't do that, the audience is going to get up and leave. So regardless of what the instrumental setting is, that's always my number one goal. Now, you want to add to that having a good voice, having good technique so you can make it through 4 hours of singing, being able to sing interesting melodies. If you're a jazz singer, being able to make up new melodies with lyrics, which is something I love to do, is to sing a second chorus or a third chorus and take the lyric and I call it remelodization on the spot, like make up new melodies. You want to add all of that on top. It's telling the story is your number one goal. And you have to find a way to do all this other stuff based on what story you're telling. When I'm at Swing 46, I try to really choose rhythms that are danceable, because they've got a dance floor in front of the stage and they want people to get up and dance. So I'm going to pick a lot of swing tunes, and tunes like, salsa, rumba, swing, medium swing, ballads, whatever you can dance to. I'm going to pick stuff like that. If I'm in a jazz club that's more for listening, I might do some more esoteric material. I might do more originals. I might do a different variety of tempos. If I'm with a big band, I am not the leader. I am a side person. So I do whatever is required of me. I do my best job to sing whatever is required to me in that role. That's the difference between being a band leader and being a side person. And there's a big difference. With the Bobsters, again, I'm the soprano, even though I'm really an alto. Don't tell anybody. I call myself an alto on helium. I ended up in a Broadway show called City of Angels, where I was asked to be a soprano in a quartet like I'm doing now. I was a lifelong alto. I freaked out. And of course I said yes when I was invited to be the soprano. I would have said yes if he invited, if Cy Coleman himself invited me. If he'd said, Amy, do you want to be a tree? I would have said yes. I would have, it was Broadway. I was like, yeah. So I ran to this wonderful teacher named Nancy Collier, who helped me kind of open up my high notes. And that's when I suddenly became a soprano, a vocal jazz group soprano. So now I'm doing the same thing. And as the soprano, a lot of times I have the melody. So I feel like it's kind of my job to make sure that the story gets across at these lightning fast lyrics that come out. That's kind of my job some of the time. I'd say a lot of the time. So like I said, that's my number one goal in any performance, is reaching the audience with the story. You want to reach out to the audience. You want to communicate with them. You want them to feel what you're talking about, because that's what it's all about. Is the story.
It's a wonderful answer, and it's different from other answers I have received. So thank you. You do bring something very different and varied, yet also complementary to the whole ensemble, if you will. So thank you. That's very educational here. So the last thing I was going to touch on, and I'm glad you brought it up, was I would be remiss if I didn't mention about your participation in the Broadway show City of Angels, which I believe was nominated for 6 Tonys, and also nominated a Grammy, or won 6 Tonys, or not, and nominated for the Grammy for the original cast recording, which you were a part of.
We were nominated for 11 Tonys, and we won 6. We won 6 Tonys, which was amazing. We were nominated for a Grammy. We should have won it. It went to like the European version of Les Mis. They'd already won a Grammy. I'm like, oh, why didn't we get it? Anyway, whatever. At least we were nominated, and I am on the cast album. If you Google it, or if you have it, you'll hear me I'm on 7 cuts on the album. It was such a magnificent experience. I was a musical theater geek as a kid. I did do some musicals after college. When I graduated, I got to be Huddle and Fiddler on the Roof, which is one of my dream roles. I got to do that at a dinner theater in Ohio, 8 shows a week. It was a professional equity house. I was in some other musicals, and when I got to New York, I thought I could do everything. So I did the Broadway auditions, the musical theater auditions, for 1 month. 1 month only. I went to the cattle calls, those, infamous cattle calls where you wait for hours and you get in, you sing 16 bars, and they're like, nice voice, next. I went through that for about a month, and I went, I can't tolerate this. This is just like banging your head against a wall. So I completely put the musical theater thing. I'm like, I'm done with that. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to focus on jazz. But one thing that I did immediately when I first moved to New York is I got a job at Trinity Church on Wall Street in the choir. And I met some lovely people there, wonderful people. And two of the people I met, one was the very renowned jazz singer, Judy Niemak, we're still very good friends, and another wonderful singer named Alexandra Ivanov. And we started a group called the Jazz Babies, was based on the Boswell sisters. And we were together all through the 80s. And Alex got a call to do this school gig that she didn't want to do. So she gave it to me, and it was a vocal jazz quintet. I was an alto or second soprano. I did that for years. So I gained a reputation right away in New York as being a good reader and a good jazz group singer. So over the years, I would get calls. And in 1989, I'd only been in New York a few years. That's when Cy Coleman was ready to produce City of Angels. And I was in another group with an arranger named Ned Ginsburg called the New York Singers Orchestra, 26 vocalists. And the contractor for City of Angels called Ned and said, "Who do you recommend?" And my name was on the list. He recommended a bunch of people. So I got a phone call one day saying, "Would you like to audition for a Broadway show?" And I'm like, well, let me think about that for a year. Yes. And I went into the audition, and the audition requirements were a vocalese and a swing tune. So I walked in, Lee Musiker was at the piano, who I knew already, who after the show went on to be Tony Bennett's musical director for many years. He was at the piano, and I was like, "Oh, Lee, oh my God," so happy to see him. And I sang all of Moody's Mood for Love. They loved it. And then I sang On the Sunny Side of the Street, 2 choruses where I invented new melodies on the second chorus. I mean, and I was expecting them to stop me after 16 bars because that's the typical Broadway thing, but they let me finish. I was like, wow. And they were like, "Okay, could you please wait outside?" So I was at 890 Broadway, which was the very popular audition and rehearsal building on Lower Broadway in like 16th Street. And they kept bringing me back in and trying me with different combinations of people. They had me sight read, and then they'd say, "Okay, please wait outside." And I was there for about 4 or 5 hours, and there were about 80 singers there altogether. And at the end of the day, they brought me back in, and they had me sing with 3 other singers. And they said, "Thank you very much." And I walked out of there. I went to the phone booth. I called my answering machine, and there was a message: "We would like to offer you the role of the soprano in the show." I was like, of course, I called my mom right away. I'm like, "Mom, I'm going to be on Broadway." So anyway, that's how I got that gig. It came to me. I was not trying to be on Broadway. It was because I had been in vocal groups. So I went to this wonderful teacher, Nancy Collier, who taught me to kind of how to find my high notes, which I still teach her methods today, and I use them for myself so that I can sing high. So that's how I got to City of Angels. It was a magnificent experience. I think the best part really was the rehearsal period, the 3-month rehearsal period. Every day, all day long, with Cy Coleman, Larry Gelbart, hanging out with Larry Gelbart, Michael Blakemore, the director, James Naughton, the star of the show, the other 3 singers, Gary Kahn, Peter Davis, and Jackie Presti. We had a great blend. And our musical director for the quartet was Yaron Gershovsky, who is the musical director for the Manhattan Transfer for 50 years now. And we got to work with him. It was amazing. It was an amazing creative process. It was a magnificent show. It was so much fun to be in. I just loved it. And they expected it to flop and close within like 5 days. And it became like the sleeper hit of the year. And we ran for almost 3 years. We won, 6 Tonys. We were on the Tonys. We were on TV for the Tony Awards. But most importantly, the music, the Cy Coleman score was so magnificent. The music was so gorgeous. And by the way, I don't want to forget David Zippel, the lyricist, wrote great lyrics. And there's a ballad in the show called "With Every Breath I Take." Like the first day of rehearsal, Cy and Pat Marshall, Larry Gelbart's wife, who was a musical theater person, at the piano, they went through the entire score, and I was like in tears by the end of the day. And I heard that ballad, and I'm like, oh my God, that ballad. So I got my hands on it, and I did record it on When I Look in Your Eyes, "With Every Breath I Take." Beautiful, beautiful ballad, written in the 1980s, but sounds like from, maybe the 50s or something. It was a magnificent experience. I can't believe I got to hang out with Cy Coleman for months and months. It was just huge, huge fun. And I feel very grateful and lucky that I got to do it. So yeah, City of Angels on Broadway. That was really, really, really fun.
From other musicians that I've interviewed who have cut their teeth, so to speak, on Broadway, they say that those experiences gave them a whole other set of skills and way of looking at music than when they were performing in, say, jazz clubs. So would you find that to be the same for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there was so much I learned from it. I think one of the biggest lessons I learned, because we did 8 shows a week, 2 shows on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And, I didn't want to kvetch or complain. But at a certain point after a year of 8 shows a week, I got a little tired of it because I had to do the exact same thing in every show. And, some people actually would drop out because they couldn't do it anymore. Ironically, Broadway can become a factory job because you do it again and again and again. You do the exact same thing every night. And the one thing that I learned about that was that the audience was different every night. And I would look out to the audience as I did. We opened the show. Our overture was how the show opened. And I would look out at them when the curtain went up, and there they were, and we were singing. And I thought, these people paid a lot of money to come here. They ordered their tickets advance. They paid a lot of money for the tickets. They probably drove in, they parked in a garage, they got dressed up. Maybe they came from out of town. They're staying in a hotel. They paid a lot of money to come see us. So I owe them the best show I can give them. That's my job as a professional, to give them the best performance they could possibly experience. And I think it's a really good work ethic for whatever you do as a performer. People come to see you. You're lucky when they come to see you. You have to love them for it. You have to thank them and love them for coming. People, especially now, you can stay in your pizza stained sweatpants and hang out in front of the TV all night. People are showering, getting dressed, putting on makeup, paying money, getting in their cars, going through the tunnels, the bridge, and they're paying to come see you. So I think that's one of the big lessons I learned in that show is just, it's my job to give my best at all times. And that could be a Broadway theater where there's 1,500 or 2,000 people in the audience, to a jazz club where maybe 3 people show up, which happens sometimes, regardless, whoever's in the audience, you have to appreciate them and love them for coming out. And I do have a quick little story about Ella Fitzgerald. She played in my hometown in Cincinnati when I was 19, and my dad knew the maitre d' and got me ringside seats at this kind of supper club place. I went with a date. I really wanted to meet her, but it was very crowded afterwards, and I got a little chicken. So I chickened out of going backstage. But then as we went out to get our car, we saw her band get in a dark blue limo, and there was another dark blue limo in front of it. And I said to my friend, Elliot, I think that's them. So we followed, the supper club was in Kentucky, Cincinnati's on the river. So we followed them down the highway over the bridge and into downtown Cincinnati. And they went up a ramp and I went down. I was like, darn, I lost them. So I went to the 3 big hotels in downtown Cincinnati. I went to the first one, no blue limo. Second one, no blue limo. Third one, there's the blue limos pulling out of the driveway. And I said, Elliot, she's here. It was 2, maybe 2:30 in the morning. So me, I was such a maniac when I was 19. I mean, forget about it. I went running into the hotel. I left him in the car, left the keys. I threw the car into park. I left the car on. I went running into the hotel. There was Ella Fitzgerald standing at the elevator, at an elevator bank with a wall. She had no escape. And I went zooming in. I went, oh, Miss Fitzgerald. And she had done 2 sets. She was sweating. She was on her feet. She worked so hard. And I said, Miss Fitzgerald. And she turned to me. It was just me and her. And she goes, yes, like that. I went, I just saw you at Beverly Hills Country Club and you're just so amazing. I mean, I want to be a singer like you. And I just think you're incredible. I mean, I can't believe I'm meeting you. Like, you're just the most amazing thing on the planet. And the elevator door opened. She stepped into the elevator. She took my hand. She shook my hand and she went, I love you, honey. And the elevator door closed and off she went finally to her hotel room to rest. And I tell my students that story all the time because the lesson I learned from that was no matter who compliments you, you want to give them some love, because without our audience, we would be nowhere. We would be nowhere. If nobody came to see us, we wouldn't be able to perform. And the great Ella Fitzgerald was so nice to me, this crazy kid. I'm, chasing after him, wearing a formal and high heels and everything. I mean, it was nuts, but she was so sweet to me. And I swear to you, true story. It really happened. I got to shake Ella Fitzgerald's hand. It was such a thrill. And a great lesson that I learned.
It's exciting and it encourages me that to see someone of your stature go fangirl on another musician. So it's really kind of nice to see that. So after I see, so on the 27th, Sunday the 27th, you'll be at William Patterson with the Royal Bobsters. So when I approach you, I will gladly fangirl on you, and we'll have a wonderful a moment where you'll say, "I love you, honey," and you can walk in backstage.
And I'll fangirl on you back.
So with our upcoming, I've enjoyed this so immensely, and I'm gonna have to wrap it up here. I feel like I could talk to you for a good another hour. So thank you for taking the time. So Sunday the 27th, William Patterson, March 27th at 4 o'clock. The Royal Boxers will be performing, and also they will be performing at Birdland in New York City, May 13th and 14th.
And
So that's with the weather turning nice.
Sunday, May 13th, 14th, and 15th, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 3 nights.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So yes, with the weather becoming nicer, that's a great place to see you. And of course, also in New York City on Restaurant Row at Swing 46, catch you with your band. So, gee, thank you so much. I can't tell you how happy I am to have had this opportunity. So I hope you have a great night. And
really did your homework. Thank you. You've asked really excellent questions. You read all about me. I'm very flattered. Thank you so much for doing that work. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I look forward to seeing you soon. And everybody have a great night.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Stay well. Thanks for supporting the music.